Steve Ditko is quite possibly one of the most influential artists of the 20th century, not only in the realm of comic books where he made his insurmountable impact on the world, but art in general. When I was going to college, every art teacher I spoke to told me that art, at its core, is about expression and emotion. And if there's one thing Steve Ditko's art had that no one else could replicate, it was his extreme emotional expressiveness that he gave to each of his characters. Sure, they could mimic his gangly bodies or his claustrophobic use of the 9-panel page layout, but could any of his colleagues or followers in the comic book industry, let alone a real human being, replicate faces like the ones he drew? Okay, fair point. Obviously, if you know Ditko's name, then you're aware of the characters he created, and just how big of an impact they've made on pop culture. Sure, his pre- and post-Marvel works only ever reached a modest success at best, but the Spider-Man character makes over $1 billion per year in merchandise alone. So, not a bad legacy. Now, what's the point of mentioning all this? It's to point out that when you make not one, but two characters who want to dominate the box office, that you're going to attract some attention to yourself. Ditko had been a prominent name in comics for a long time, but ironically, around the same time that he left mainstream funny books behind is when Spider-Man went to cinemas, made him a bigger name than ever. From then to the day he died, Steve Ditko was hounded by fans and reporters alike who wanted to pick his brain, get autographs, or just stalk him for
journalistic intent.
This is sadly nothing new for an artist, or any person with public notoriety. However, Ditko received a different kind of attention from the public, one that goes beyond the usual attraction to public figures because he came from a time when artists didn't have to constantly display themselves in the public eye. Let's face it, if you create any kind of content, especially now when there's more options and thus more competition than ever, you have to self-promote to some degree. Ditko, however, didn't care for media attention and simply wanted to be left alone, choosing to never indulge in the expected convention appearances, public signings, or social media promotion of his work. Although he was born in 1927, so he probably didn't even know how a computer worked. This went on to leave a very misguided and toxic view of him in the general public. Google Steve Ditko and you're bound to find countless articles over the years about how reclusive he was, or how he refused to give interviews and answer fan questions, with many of these statements coming from the same people who showed up at his door unannounced to harass him or scold him over his worldview. All in the name of good journalism. This, combined with his objectivist beliefs, led the public to believe in a fiction and fantasy that Ditko was some hermit who lived in a hole in the wall, shunned the light, and had no family or friends. However, in the few years since his passing, Ditko's relatives and former colleagues have come forward and given statements disproving these assumptions. His relatives have stated that he was actually a very loving family man, while his colleagues have pointed out that he had a fairly active social life. Bringing this information forward has been eye-opening because it displays a problem within the public consciousness that has been stewing for some time. Making assumptions about an artist's identity is nothing new. Neither is fan culture's idea that they're entitled to answers for the artists they proclaim to admire the moment they're denied them. But Ditko's story stands out because it shines an interesting light on how people view anyone with some sort of fame who won't indulge them. Because Ditko wanted his work to speak for itself and for people to simply value his privacy, they viewed him as reclusive and weird.
Is there something wrong with this guy? He created popular characters. He has fans. How come he won't answer my questions? His characters are movie stars. How come he never cashed in? He doesn't do public appearances. Is he some sort of freak?
In response to this, many fans took it upon themselves to show up at his door and get their burning questions answered. And most of them were uninvited. From comics pros to journalists to your everyday reader, there are a surprising number of accounts from people who showed up at Ditko's office that claim he was rude because he wouldn't offer up his time, or tried to keep them from peeking into his workspace like it was a public display. But for all their claims of rudeness, Ditko showed a superhuman amount of patience to these people. There have been accounts from those who met Ditko that mentioned that he would converse with them for upwards of an hour before politely dismissing them. Broadcaster Jonathan Ross and novelist Neil Gaiman infamously met Ditko at his office after being dismissed by him over the phone, only for him to offer up his time and give the pair free comics. Despite a fairly generous treatment towards many fans, Ditko is still misconceived as being the rude one in these accounts because he wanted to be left alone to work undisturbed.
But how dare this elderly man not stop everything he was doing to answer my questions? give me an autograph, or let me get a picture with him.
This behavior was a common enough occurrence that Ditko wrote a public essay about it, stating that meeting him was nothing more than a comic fan's bragging rights and held no value when viewed objectively. There's a sad irony to this perception of him when you realize that Ditko actually did answer fan questions all the time. You just had to write them. There are numerous fan accounts online displaying their mail from Steve Ditko. A common thread amongst these writings is that if you wrote him a letter that had a question for him, then he would answer it to the best of his ability. If you asked him for art advice or critiques, he would give those too. He didn't always give the answer that you wanted to read, but he would still take the time to write you back regardless. How many comic book creators can you think of who took the time to answer most of the fan mail they received? Especially one as old as Steve Ditko, who could have simply retired by that point and closed down his office. Definitely not a recluse. A final point worth noting is that last year, his nephew Mark Ditko said that when his family checked Steve's office after his passing, the door wouldn't open at first due to the sheer volume of letters he had received. So take that with you.
In conclusion,
In the age of Twitter and Instagram, it's easier than ever for anyone to make a connection with their fans, or the people they're fans of. But it bothers me that there's still this view that if an artist chooses not to promote themselves or take part in fan interaction, that they're the problem. In reality, an artist doesn't owe anything beyond their best work. If that work doesn't resonate with you, and you paid for it, then you're free to criticize it to your heart's content. That's how a free market works. But the moment we start demanding more from the artist beyond their best work is where the problems begin to set in. If people want to give public appearances, autograph sessions, or just answer fan questions in person, then great. But if not, then that's their right as a human being, and we shouldn't make a public display out of them or become a nuisance in the process. As the man once said, A is A.